The other aspect I know about the Eucharist has to do with what is always on the table when I grew up. It says, "In remembrance of me." And in remembrance of me. So the idea of memory, I know, is a theme in your and amnesia, you could say, or how we forget, is embedded into your thesis. How do you include reflections on that in
Mhm.
there? What's your approach to the idea of memory um, in the Eucharist?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it relates to what you just said, but I do have a chapter on memory for that very reason, that verse, do this in remembrance of me.
Mm.
The Greek word is anamnesis, remembrance or memory, and it's become important in theology throughout the tradition as a way of speaking about the Eucharist and what happens there. We remember the Lord's death, which happened in the past, but by reenacting it weekly, we kind of bring that into the present. We allow it to shape um, our present and also our future,
Mhm.
um, who we are and who we are called to be, and also what we hope for.
Yep.
Um, so the Israelite people used memory in this way, right? They would recount the deeds that God had done for the people in the past, and then that called them to be a certain kind of people in the present. Remember when you were
Mm.
strangers in Egypt, therefore treat the stranger with kindness and respect and openness in your lives today. That connection between memory, who we are in the present. And also, I think in the Christian Eucharist, it's very explicit what we hope for. We're also anticipating this day when all of the realities of sadness
Mhm.
and sorrow and loss that we experience today are no more. And that is an act of faith. We don't see that happening. And the stories you're talking about, these hopeful stories, they do happen. And I wish they happened a lot more than they do.
Mhm.
Um, I think it's something that everybody has to go through if you are in a community like this for the long term, is having these expectations that you entered with to be slowly and very painfully dismantled. And I grew up with a great grandfather who had grown up on the streets of Thunder Bay,
Mm.
Ontario. Horrific childhood abuse, and developed addictions at an early age, and lived on the streets himself. And he had a radical kind of conversion to Jesus experience. The classic kind that you could hear around a campfire that changed his life.
Mhm.
And I think I might not have said it at the time, but I think that did shape my expectations or my imagination for the way
Yeah.
that Jesus would work. And after so many years at sanctuary, I realized, that just doesn't happen to a lot of people. um, and a lot of people who do have great faith, and they believe in Jesus, and they cling to Jesus. Some do, some don't.
Yeah.
But even the ones who do, you don't see that kind of dramatic life change in the way that you might hope for or want to, especially for people that you love. So it can be quite sad when multiple people that you've come to love and care for do die or do live in a fair bit of despair. Um,
Mhm.
so for me, the theological discussion of memory came down at that point of grief and loss, and what does that mean? The um, In a community, how can we hold the memories of people that
Mm.
society prefers to forget?
Mm.
And then how in our own worship life um, can we address this? And so I talked about um, lament in the Bible is a very active part of public worship, and in contemporary churches, at least contemporary churches in full of people from middle class comfort type backgrounds, you don't see lament quite as often. And I
No.
think at Sanctuary, we didn't intentionally incorporate lament as part of our worship, but it
Yeah.
just happened. It
Yeah.
happened because of the people in our community. They would come in right into our Eucharist. I remember one of my early years there, someone just had lost his close friend and partner, and he came running in and just fell before the table in tears. Um, weeping and saying, I love him and I miss him so much. Um, and then he drank the entire glass of wine himself. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he wasn't doing anything intentionally theological,
Mm.
but somehow he knew that that table was a place to go with his grief. I
Mm.
don't know what he thought, how much he thought about it. All I know is that's where he went, and he brought his grief there. And it just so happens that the table is a memory of a broken, tortured body that was taken far too
Wow.
early from the world. And so, to me, those resonances, whether they were in people's minds or not, they're very visible. And so I try to draw some of those out.
Wow. That puts me at pause because, um, yeah, I don't know if people understand how significant memorials are, um, especially when someone dies in your community. I know for us at Evergreen, memorials were very important. These are youth. They're youth who are dying, as a result of, it could be addiction, it could have been health or whatnot, that as a
Mhm.
result of um, getting killed by another person, being murdered. So many circumstances that have led to that. And when we gather together in these memorials, it is like, person after person giving words, remembering them. And oftentimes and I know you guys know this, like it's even more than the funeral service. Like what happens in the memorials that we have at our center ends up being really a place where people can really let things out. And that should not be, um I mean, that needs to be very considered within the church, like how much they are missing from those sacred moments, of being with people in their darkest, most hurtful times. You
Yeah.
know, the church, in a way, doesn't see much of that, right? And I know, your colleagues, particularly your friends there who are working at Sanctuary, they have a big role in the memorials that happen right beside Eden Center in that small little church,
Mhm.
where they meet regularly to remember people who are perhaps the John Does or the Jane Does who aren't even identified. Um, you guys are intentional to be there regularly to just acknowledge that there was a life lost, whether they're people that were close to you or not. The importance of being there for every life that is lost, especially like today is like minus 13 or whatnot.
Mhm.
I don't know what's happening after just snow that just came down the other day, and then what's happening today. We don't know who might have passed away, and so um, that connection between memory and memorial seems quite
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. And I think it's another
important.
example of something that's it's intentional, but it's not intentional. So
Hmm.
um, it's not intentional in the sense that we actually don't want memorials to be a big part of our community life.
Yeah,
They are,
it's
right?
not aspirational.
No, it's like it's a terrible thing to have to be such a strong shaper of our community life, um, but it's one of those things that once you follow along a certain path of joining your story to other people's stories of sharing life in whatever small ways we manage to do that, where it becomes, you have to do it. You have to
Yeah.
do it. You have to testify to the value of these lives and how much they mattered. And you do it in, I think you mentioned this kind of, but there is two ways that it happens. One is a kind of a public statement. Whether I knew this person or not, they still mattered and they're
Mhm.
still going to get remembered and they're still important. Um, and hopefully, even if we miss some people, by the very act of doing this, we're saying to our society and our world, let's not forget people who have been like, let's not let so many people fall through the cracks.
Yeah.
No. But then there is a very personal element to it when this is someone that you are friends with. Um, someone that you've come to love, uh, and you can testify very personally to how precious this life was. And and that's hard. I mean, so many of people's own friends, it gives people's own friends, even um, from the streets or whatnot, a forum to express their grief where they might not have been able to. um, and for those of us who might not be as close but still are close, um, it gives us that place too. And it's hard after a while. It's hard to bury people you love over and over again.
Yeah. I I want to thank you for your time, Rachel. This is has given a lot of thought, things for us to think about. And I just want to say that I think when I connect with you and certain people I know who have been working in vulnerable communities for a while, I do see something very particular in that, and you've said it throughout this whole time, is that it has it has less to do with wanting to be necessarily in the deepest, darkest places in people's lives, but it comes out of necessity. And it's not like, some people will come and they'll boast, and again, not boast, but like revel in this despair or suffering and say, "Wow, this is what I want. Like I want to be in that place." And I think different people in their stages in their faith will go through that place where like, no, I got to go to those places that are hard to reach or whatnot, because that's what Jesus did. And it is an imperative. And then there is where I can see in your route where it's like you are in relationship. It's like, oh man, do I have to do, like, I got to do a memorial. Like I got to be here. I just have to, because I'm entangled into these relationships that necessitate me to be there. Man, do I not want us to suffer? Like I don't
Mhm.
want that to be it. And it's as if we have to talk about it. And the tone in which we talk about it is very different than it's like, well, I did this, like I actually, this is how legit I am as a Christian to actually do all these things. I am hardcore when it comes to that. It's not, no, we don't want to be hardcore if we can possibly not be. Like, it would be wonderful if we didn't have to do these things. And there's something very significant about that. Um, so I thank you so much for this. And I thank you for your time. Surprisingly, I did not hear your kids in the background. Um, Still napping, I think. I think my kids were yelling, but I have noise canceling, so I can't really hear them.
Yeah.
Um, but thank you so much. And I think the class and whoever's listening will get a lot from it. All
Oh,
right. So thank you.
thank you, Jesse.